I'm Katherine Price, 28, a freelance graphic designer. The crystal wine glass shattered against the marble floor, sending fragments skittering across my mother-in-law's pristine kitchen like scattered diamonds. The sound cut through the dinner party chatter, silencing 20 guests mid-conversation. "Oops," I whispered, my hands trembling as I stared at the mess. But it wasn't the broken glass that made my heart race. It was the conversation I'd just overheard from the hallway. "She's obviously just using him for money. Look at her, unemployed, no family money, living in that tiny apartment before David. It's so transparent." Margaret's voice had carried that particular tone she reserved for discussing things she found distasteful, like expired milk or my existence in her son's life. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. I knelt down, carefully picking up the larger pieces, my fingers moving automatically while my mind reeled. The cool marble pressed against my knees through my dress, the black one David had bought me last month, the one Margaret had complimented with that razor-thin smile that never reached her eyes. "Katherine, darling, what happened?" Margaret's voice floated over me, dripping with false concern. She appeared beside me in her perfectly pressed cream silk blouse, her manicured hands fluttering uselessly above the mess. "Just clumsy," I managed, not trusting myself to look up. The scent of her expensive perfume, something French and suffocating, mixed with the lingering aroma of the roasted lamb she'd served. My stomach churned. "Oh, don't worry about it. Maria will clean that up." She snapped her fingers, and their housekeeper appeared as if summoned by magic. These things happen when people aren't used to quality pieces. The words hit like a slap. I finally looked up, meeting her pale blue eyes that held all the warmth of winter frost. Around us, the dinner party guests had resumed their conversations, but I caught the sideways glances, the whispered exchanges behind raised hands. "I'll replace it," I said quietly, standing up. My legs felt unsteady.
"Oh, nonsense.
"It's just a baccarat crystal. Nothing too expensive." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass, though I suppose for someone in your situation, it might seem overwhelming. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I felt heat creep up my neck, that familiar burn of humiliation I'd been swallowing for the past year. Every family dinner, every charity event, every casual gathering where I was introduced as David's little girlfriend, with that particular emphasis that made it sound temporary. "Where is David?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Oh, he's in his father's study with the other men, discussing business. You know how it is, important matters." She waved her hand dismissively. "Why don't you join the ladies in the sitting room? We're discussing the upcoming charity auction, though I suppose you wouldn't be bidding." I excused myself and walked toward the powder room, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors. The hallway was lined with family portraits, generations of prices in their expensive frames, looking down at me with the same cold judgment I'd grown accustomed to. In the bathroom, I gripped the marble countertop and stared at my reflection. My dark hair was still perfectly styled, my makeup intact, but my eyes betrayed everything. The doubt, the hurt, the growing certainty that maybe Margaret was right. Maybe I was just the poor girl who'd gotten lucky, who'd somehow convinced her successful son to waste his time on someone beneath his station. I thought about my tiny studio apartment, about the freelance graphic design work that barely covered rent, about how David had insisted on paying for everything, dinners, clothes, this dress I was wearing. When had I stopped protesting? When had I started accepting it all as normal? The sound of male laughter drifted from down the hall. David's laugh, warm and genuine, mixing with his father's deeper chuckle and the voices of their business associates. I followed the sound, needing to see him, needing some anchor in this sea of judgment and whispered cruelties. The study door was slightly ajar, and I could see them through the gap. David in his navy suit, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to a group of older men in expensive suits. His father, Richard, sat behind his massive mahogany desk, looking every inch the successful real estate mogul he was. "The new development project is moving faster than expected," David was saying. We should have the permits approved by next month. And the funding? Asked one of the men, someone I didn't recognize. David's expression shifted slightly, and he glanced toward the door. For a moment, I thought he'd seen me, but his gaze moved past without recognition. Actually, he said, his voice carrying a strange note I'd never heard before, that's been taken care of. More than taken care of, actually. Your trust fund finally kicked in? Richard asked with a knowing smile. David shook his head, and something cold settled in my stomach.
No, Dad.
Actually, it's Katherine. She's been funding the entire project. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stepped back from the door, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle the gasp that threatened to escape. Katherine? Richard's voice was sharp with surprise. Your girlfriend? But I thought she was broke? Unemployed? Using me for money. David's laugh was bitter. That's what everyone thinks, isn't it? That's certainly what Mom thinks. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it through the door. The hallway suddenly felt too small, too airless. Son, what are you talking about? Richard's voice had dropped to that dangerous, quiet tone I'd heard him use in business calls. Katherine inherited her grandmother's estate last year. Turns out the old woman was sitting on a fortune, real estate investments, stocks, bonds. Katherine's worth about $15 million, Dad. She's been quietly funding my projects for months, and she made me promise not to tell anyone. She wanted to see how people would treat her if they thought she had nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and rapid, mixing with the distant sounds of the dinner party continuing in the other room. 15 million? Richard's voice was barely a whisper. Give or take. And she's been watching Mom tear her apart at every family gathering, listening to the snide comments about gold digging and social climbing. She's been funding my entire business expansion while my own mother calls her a parasite. I heard footsteps approaching the study door, and panic shot through me. I couldn't let them find me here, couldn't let them know I'd overheard. I turned to flee back toward the powder room, but my heel caught on the Persian runner. The sound of my stumble echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. The study door swung open, and David appeared in the doorway, his face pale with shock. Behind him, I could see Richard and the other men, all staring at me with expressions ranging from surprise to calculation. Katherine, David breathed. How long have you been? But before he could finish, Margaret's voice cut through the air like a blade from behind me. Well, what do we have here? I turned slowly, my heart still hammering against my ribs. Margaret stood at the end of the hallway, her cream silk blouse now seeming more like armor, her pale eyes glittering with something between triumph and suspicion. Behind her, 3 of the dinner party guests had gathered, Mrs. Whitmore from the country club, Dr. Harrison and his wife, all craning their necks like vultures sensing carrion. I started, but Margaret cut me off with a raised hand. Eavesdropping, dear? How common. She glided closer, her heels silent on the Persian runner. Though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. People of your background often resort to such tactics. The words hit like ice water. I felt David step out of the study behind me, his presence warm at my back, but I couldn't turn to look at him. Not yet. Not when everything I thought I knew about the past year was crumbling around me like sand. Margaret. David's voice carried a warning I'd never heard before. That's enough. Is it, darling? She smiled that razor-thin smile, but now it seemed more predatory than dismissive. I think it's time we all had an honest conversation about your little arrangement. The word arrangement dripped with implication. Around us, the other guests shifted uncomfortably, but none of them left. Of course they wouldn't. This was better than any theater performance. You want honesty? I found my voice, surprised by how steady it sounded. Let's talk about honesty. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. Oh, this should be interesting. Please, enlighten us about honesty, dear. I could feel David tense behind me, could sense his father and the business associates filing out of the study to witness whatever was about to unfold. The hallway suddenly felt like a stage, with me at center spotlight. For the past year, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, you've made it very clear what you think of me. The poor little nobody who trapped your precious son. The gold digger. The social climber who doesn't belong in your world. Well, Margaret said with a delicate shrug, if the shoe fits. The shoe doesn't fit, Margaret. It never did. I took a step closer to her, close enough to see the tiny lines around her eyes that her expensive makeup couldn't quite hide. But you know what? I let you think it did. I let you believe your own narrative because I wanted to see who you really were underneath all that polish and breeding. Her smile faltered slightly. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Don't you? I could smell her perfume again, that suffocating French scent that now seemed more like desperation than elegance. You've spent a year treating me like garbage, making snide comments about my clothes, my apartment, my situation. You've made it clear at every opportunity that I'm not good enough for your family. Katherine, David said quietly behind me, but I held up a hand without turning. No, David. Let me finish. I kept my eyes locked on Margaret's, watching as confusion began to creep into her expression. You want to know about my situation, Margaret? My real situation. The hallway had gone completely silent. Even the sounds from the dinner party seemed muted, as if the entire house was holding its breath. My grandmother died last year. I continued, my voice carrying clearly in the silence. Sweet old lady who lived in a tiny house and clipped coupons and made me think she was barely scraping by. Turns out she was sitting on a fortune. Real estate investments, stock portfolios, bonds, $15 million, Margaret. 15 million. I watched the color drain from her face, watched her mouth open slightly in shock. And you know what the really beautiful part is? She left it all to me. Every penny. Because she said I was the only one in the family who never asked her for anything, who loved her for who she was, not what she had. Mrs. Whitmore gasped audibly behind Margaret. Dr. Harrison muttered something under his breath that sounded like Jesus Christ. So when David told me about his business expansion, when he needed funding for his development projects, I was happy to help. Quietly, anonymously, because I love him and I believe in him. I paused, letting that sink in. Your son's entire business success this past year? I funded it. Every permit, every contractor, every piece of equipment, my money. Margaret's face had gone from pale to ashen. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. But here's the thing, I continued, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I made David promise not to tell anyone. I wanted to see how people would treat me if they thought I had nothing. I wanted to see who would show me kindness without expecting anything in return. I let my gaze sweep over the assembled guests, watching them squirm under the weight of their own judgment. And you know what I learned, Margaret? I learned that you're exactly the kind of person I thought you were. Shallow, cruel, and so obsessed with money and status that you can't see past your own prejudices.
I didn't.
Margaret stammered, but I wasn't finished. You didn't what?
No?
Care? Think it mattered. I shook my head. You treated me like dirt because you thought I was poor. You made me feel small and worthless because you believed I had nothing to offer your family except my supposed desperation to climb the social ladder. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the weight of everyone's stares. Katherine, Margaret finally managed, her voice barely audible. If I had known, if you had known, you would have treated me differently. And that, Margaret, tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. I turned then, finally looking at David. His face was a mixture of pride, pain, and something that might have been relief. Behind him, his father stood in the study doorway, his expression unreadable. David, I said softly, we need to talk. He nodded, stepping forward to take my hand. His fingers were warm, steady, familiar. Katherine, I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell them, but you made me promise. I know. I squeezed his hand. But I think the experiment is over now. We started to walk past Margaret toward the front of the house, but her voice stopped us. Wait. The word came out strangled, desperate. Katherine, please.
I
I made a mistake. I turned back to her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Without the armor of her superiority, she looked smaller, older, more fragile than I'd ever noticed. Yes, I said simply. You did. Can we start over?
Please.
The question hung in the air between us. Around us, the dinner guests watched like spectators at a tennis match, their heads turning back and forth between Margaret and me. I studied her face, looking for something genuine beneath the desperation. I don't know, Margaret.
Can we?
Because starting over would mean you'd have to look at yourself honestly. It would mean admitting that you're the kind of person who judges others based on their bank account. It would mean acknowledging that you've spent a year being cruel to someone who never did anything to deserve it. Her eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion I'd ever seen from her. Yes. You're right. I've been horrible to you. I've been everything you said and worse.
Why?
The question came out softer than I intended. Why was it so important to you to make me feel small? Margaret's composure finally cracked completely. A tear slipped down her cheek, leaving a track through her perfect makeup. Because I was terrified, she whispered. Terrified that David would choose you over us. Over me. I've already lost so much control over his life, and when he brought you home, you were so young, so pretty, so obviously in love with him. I thought if I could make you feel unwelcome enough, you'd leave. The honesty in her voice was startling. I felt David's hand tighten around mine. So you decided to be cruel. I decided to protect my family. But I was wrong. I can see that now. She wiped at her cheek with a trembling hand. You're not trying to take him away from us. You're trying to build something with him. I looked at David, seeing my own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. This wasn't how I'd imagined this moment would go. I'd expected anger, confrontation, maybe even satisfaction at Margaret's shock. I hadn't expected this raw vulnerability. Margaret, I said carefully, I need you to understand something. I don't need your approval to be with David. I don't need your acceptance or your blessing. But if you want to be part of our lives, really part of them, then things have to change. Completely. She nodded eagerly.
Yes.
Anything. I'll do anything. It's not about doing anything. It's about being different. Being better. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I'm not going anywhere, Margaret. David and I are building a life together, and that life is going to include marriage, children, holidays, family gatherings. You can either be part of that with kindness and respect, or you can continue being the bitter woman who drove her son away. The weight of the ultimatum settled over the hallway like a heavy blanket. Margaret's face cycled through a dozen emotions: shock, fear, calculation, and finally something that might have been acceptance. I understand, she said quietly. And I want to be part of it.
Part of your lives.
If you'll let me. Before I could respond, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Heavy footsteps crossed the marble foyer, and a voice called out that made my blood turn to ice. Margaret? David? Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder coming from the airport. I knew that voice. I'd spent 3 years trying to forget it, 3 years building a life that didn't include the man who'd shattered my heart and disappeared without a word. David's hand went rigid in mine. That's impossible, he breathed. The footsteps grew closer, and then he appeared at the end of the hallway, tall, dark-haired, wearing an expensive suit that fit him like it was made for his body. His green eyes swept over the assembled group before landing on me with an impact that nearly knocked me off my feet. Hello, Katherine, said my ex-fiancé, the man who'd vanished 3 days before our wedding. Surprise. The world tilted sideways. I felt David's hand slip from mine as I stared at the ghost from my past, my mind struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. James Morrison stood at the end of the hallway like he belonged there, like he hadn't disappeared from my life 3 years ago without explanation, without apology, without a trace. James. The name fell from my lips like a stone. He looked exactly the same. Those sharp green eyes that had once made me believe in forever, the crooked smile that had convinced me to say yes when he proposed on a beach in Santorini. The only difference was the expensive cut of his suit, the confidence in his posture that spoke of success and money. "You two know each other?" Margaret's voice cut through my shock, high and strained. James's smile widened, and I felt sick. "Know each other?" Margaret, Katherine, and I were engaged. She was going to be Mrs. James Morrison until she got cold feet and called off the wedding. The lie hit me like a physical blow. I stepped backward, bumping into David, who caught my shoulders with steady hands. "That's not what happened," I whispered, but my voice was too weak to carry. "What?" David's voice was sharp, dangerous. "Katherine, what is he talking about?" I turned to look at David, seeing confusion and hurt beginning to cloud his features. "David, I can explain." "Oh, this is rich," James interrupted, moving closer with that predatory grace I'd once found attractive. "You didn't tell him about us? About how you left me at the altar?" "I didn't leave you anywhere." The words exploded out of me, loud enough to echo off the hallway walls. "You disappeared. 3 days before our wedding, you vanished without a word." James's expression shifted, a flicker of something guilt? Regret? Crossing his features before the mask slipped back into place. "That's not how I remember it." "I don't care how you remember it," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I care about what actually happened. You took the money from our joint account, you canceled the venue, you called off the caterer, and then you disappeared. I spent 3 days thinking you were dead before your mother finally told me you'd gone to Europe for business." The hallway had gone silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Charged, dangerous. I could feel David's tension radiating behind me, could sense Margaret and the other guests absorbing every word like sponges. "Katherine," David said quietly, "why didn't you tell me about this?" I turned to face him, seeing the hurt in his eyes and feeling my heart crack. Because it was over. Because it didn't matter anymore. Because I thought he was gone for good. "Didn't matter?" James laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "Our 3-year relationship didn't matter? The wedding we planned didn't matter? Not after you abandoned me." I whirled back to face him, fury finally overriding shock. "Not after you left me to explain to 200 guests why there wasn't going to be a wedding. Not after you made me feel like I was so worthless that you couldn't even be bothered to break up with me to my face. I had reasons. I don't care about your reasons." I was shouting now, all the pain and humiliation I'd buried for 3 years pouring out like water from a broken dam. "You don't get to show up here and rewrite history. You don't get to make me the villain in your story." "Our story," James corrected, his voice dropping to that intimate tone he'd once used to whisper promises in my ear. "And it's not over, Katherine. It never was." The words hung in the air like a threat. I felt David step closer behind me, his presence both comforting and complicated. "Yes, it is," I said firmly. "It was over the moment you chose to run instead of talking to me. It was over when you decided I wasn't worth an explanation." "I was protecting you," James said, and for the first time, his voice cracked slightly. "I was protecting both of us." "From what?" He glanced around the hallway, taking in the assembled audience, and I saw him calculate something behind his eyes. "Maybe we should discuss this privately." "No." David's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. In front of everyone." James's gaze shifted to David, and I watched him take in my boyfriend's expensive suit, his confident posture, the way he stood protectively behind me. "And you are?" "David Price. Katherine's boyfriend." David's voice was steady, controlled, but I could hear the steel underneath. "Price." James's eyebrows rose. "As in Price Development? Richard Price's son." "That's right." Something shifted in James's expression, surprise, calculation, maybe even respect. Well, Katherine certainly landed on her feet, didn't she?" The implication in his tone made my skin crawl. "Don't," I warned. "Don't what?" "Point out that you've done quite well for yourself? From a small-town girl with nothing to the girlfriend of one of the city's most successful developers." James's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Though I suppose that's always been your talent, finding men who can take care of you." The accusation hit like a slap. I heard Margaret's sharp intake of breath, saw David's hands clench into fists. "That's enough," David said, his voice deadly quiet. "Is it?" James turned his full attention to David, and I recognized the look in his eyes, the same calculating expression he'd worn when negotiating business deals. "Tell me, David, what do you really know about Katherine? About her past? About why she's really with you?" "I know everything I need to know," David replied, but I heard the slight uncertainty in his voice. "Do you? Do you know about her family's debts? About how her father lost everything in bad investments? About how she was facing bankruptcy when we met?" Each word was a knife twist. I felt the blood drain from my face as James laid out the financial desperation I'd never told David about, the crushing weight of my father's mistakes that had driven me to work 3 jobs just to keep our family afloat. "Do you know that she only agreed to marry me after I paid off her father's creditors? After I saved her family from losing their house?" "Stop," I whispered, but James wasn't finished. "She's very good at finding men who can solve her problems, David. Very good at making them feel like heroes while she takes everything they have to offer." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, could sense the doubt creeping into David's posture behind me. "Is that true?" David's voice was barely audible. I turned to face him, seeing the hurt and confusion in his eyes, and felt my world crumble for the second time in 3 years. "David, it's not what you think. Did he pay off your family's debts?" The question hung between us like a chasm. I could lie, could deny it, could try to explain the complexity of what had happened. But I was tired of secrets, tired of half-truths and hidden histories. "Yes," I said quietly.
He did.
David's face went pale. "And you never told me." "Because it wasn't relevant. Because that's not why I was with him. And it's not why I'm with you. Isn't it?" James's voice was soft, poisonous. "Isn't it interesting how you always end up with men who can take care of you financially? How you always find someone to solve your problems?" "That's not..." I started, but David held up a hand. "I need some air," he said, his voice hollow. "I need to think." He turned and walked toward the front door, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. I started to follow him, but James caught my arm. "Let him go, Katherine. We need to talk." I jerked away from his touch like it burned. "We have nothing to talk about, don't we?" He stepped closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne, the same one he'd worn when we were together, the one that used to make me feel safe and loved. Now it just made me nauseous. "I came back for you, Katherine. I came back to explain, to make things right. 3 years too late. I had to leave. I had to disappear." His voice dropped to that intimate whisper again. "There were people looking for me, people who would have hurt you to get to me. I was protecting you." "From what? From who?" He glanced around the hallway again, and I realized that Margaret and the other guests were still there, still listening to every word. "Not here. Not like this." "Then where?"
When?
"You had 3 years to explain, James. 3 years to call, to write, to send a message through someone. You chose silence. I chose your safety. You chose the easy way out." I stepped back from him, putting distance between us. "You chose to run instead of fighting for us. You chose to let me believe I wasn't worth the truth." "Katherine, please. Just give me 5 minutes. Let me explain what really happened." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the desperation beneath the confident facade. Whatever had driven him away 3 years ago, whatever had brought him back now, it was eating at him. But I found that I didn't care anymore. "No," I said simply. "I don't want your explanations. I don't want your apologies. I don't want anything from you except for you to leave." "I can't do that." "Why not?" He was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes searching my face. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Because I never stopped loving you. Because I've spent 3 years trying to forget you and failing. Because I came back to ask you to marry me." The words hit me like a physical blow. I heard Margaret gasp, heard one of the other guests whisper something to their companion. "You're 3 years too late," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. Am I? Are you really happy with him, Katherine? Are you really in love, or are you just comfortable? Safe. The question cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I thought about David, about the easy affection between us, the comfortable partnership we'd built. I thought about the way he made me laugh, the way he held me when I had nightmares, the way he'd supported my career without trying to control it. I love him, I said and meant it. The way you loved me? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with 3 years of history and pain and unfinished business. I thought about the intensity of what James and I had shared, the all-consuming passion that had made me believe in fairy tales and forever. No, I said quietly. Not the way I loved you. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, triumph, satisfaction. I love him better, I continued, watching that hope die. I love him honestly. I love him without desperation or fear or the need to lose myself completely. I love him in a way that makes me better, not smaller. James's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hurt, anger, and finally something that might have been acceptance. Katherine.
No.
I held up a hand. You had your chance to say whatever you came here to say. Now I need you to leave. I need you to go back to whatever life you've built for yourself and let me live mine. What if I can't do that? The question sent a chill down my spine. There was something in his tone, something dark and possessive that I'd forgotten about, something that had always made me feel more owned than loved. Then that's your problem, not mine. I turned and walked toward the front door, following the path David had taken. Behind me, I heard James call my name, heard Margaret's voice rising in questions and confusion, heard the dinner guests beginning to whisper among themselves. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had to find David, had to explain, had to try to salvage what James's reappearance had threatened to destroy. I found David standing in the circular driveway, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, staring up at the star-filled sky. The night air was cool against my skin, carrying the scent of Margaret's prize-winning roses and the distant sound of traffic. David, I said softly. He didn't turn around. Is it true? All of it. I moved to stand beside him, close enough to touch, but not quite touching.
Some of it.
The parts about my family's financial problems, about James helping us. That's true. But not the way he made it sound. How was it then? I took a deep breath, tasting the night air and the weight of truth. My father made some bad investments when I was in college. Lost everything: his business, our house, my college fund. We were drowning in debt, facing bankruptcy. I was working 3 jobs just to help keep us afloat. David was quiet, listening. When I met James, I didn't know he had money. He was just this charming guy who made me laugh, who made me feel like maybe everything would be okay. We dated for 6 months before I found out he was wealthy. And then he offered to help. He said he loved me, said he wanted to take care of me and my family. He paid off the debts, helped my father start over. I paused, remembering the relief and gratitude that had felt so much like love. I thought it was romantic. I thought it meant he really loved me. But it didn't. I don't know. Maybe he did love me, in his way. But it was a possessive kind of love, a controlling kind. He liked being my savior, liked having me depend on him. And I let him because I was so grateful, so relieved to not be drowning anymore. David finally turned to look at me, his face unreadable in the moonlight. And with me? With you, it's different. I don't need you to save me, David. I choose to be with you because you make me happy, because you challenge me, because you see me as an equal partner, not a project to be fixed. But you let me pay for things. Dinners, clothes, this dress. Because you wanted to, and because I could afford to let you. Because it felt like generosity, not control. I reached for his hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. David, I have $15 million. I could buy my own clothes, my own dinners, my own everything. I let you pay because it made you happy, not because I needed you to. He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. Why didn't you tell me about James? About your family's history? Because I was ashamed. Because I was afraid you'd see me the way your mother did, as someone who is just looking for a man to take care of her. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am now, not pity me for who I used to be. I wouldn't have pitied you. Wouldn't you? Even a little? I squeezed his hand. David, you grew up with everything. You've never known what it's like to choose between groceries and electricity, to work 3 jobs and still not have enough. I was afraid you wouldn't understand. You should have trusted me. You're right. I should have. And I'm sorry. We stood in silence for a while, holding hands under the stars, listening to the distant sounds of the city and the closer sounds of the dinner party continuing inside the house. What happens now? David asked finally. Now we decide if we can move forward together, knowing everything we know. If you can forgive me for not trusting you with my past, and if I can forgive you for doubting me when James showed up. I didn't doubt you, David said quickly. I doubted myself. I doubted whether I was enough for you, whether what we have is real or just convenient. I turned to face him fully, taking his other hand in mine. David Price, you are more than enough. You are everything I never knew I wanted. You are kind without being weak, successful without being arrogant, generous without being controlling. You make me laugh, you challenge me to be better, and you love me without trying to change me. Even after tonight? Even after everything that came out. Especially after tonight. Because tonight showed me that you're willing to fight for us, that you care enough to be hurt by the possibility of losing me. David's face softened, and he lifted one hand to cup my cheek. I do care. I care more than I've ever cared about anything. Then we're going to be okay. He leaned down and kissed me, soft and sweet and full of promise. When we broke apart, I could see the love in his eyes, the certainty that had been shaken but not broken. What about James? He asked. I looked back at the house, where warm light spilled from the windows and the sounds of conversation drifted on the night air. James is the past. A chapter that's already been written and closed. You're my future, David. If you want to be. I want to be, he said without hesitation. I want to be your future, your present, your everything. Even with all the baggage? Even knowing that your mother was right about one thing, I did come from nothing. Especially because of that, David said, his voice firm. Because it means you know the value of what we're building together. Because it means you chose me, not my bank account or my family name. I smiled, feeling the last of the tension leave my shoulders. So, what do we do about the circus inside? We go back in there together. We face whatever comes next as a team. He paused, glancing toward the house. And we make it very clear to James that he's not welcome in our lives. And your mother? David's expression grew thoughtful. My mother got a wake-up call tonight. She saw what her prejudice and cruelty really look like when they're exposed to the light. Whether she learns from it or not is up to her. We started walking back toward the house, our hands intertwined, our steps synchronized. As we reached the front door, David stopped and turned to me one more time. Katherine? Yes. Next time someone from your past shows up to cause trouble, promise me you'll tell me everything from the beginning. No more secrets, no more protecting me from the truth. I promise, I said and meant it. No more secrets. Good. Because I have something to tell you too. My heart skipped. What? He smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. I've been carrying around an engagement ring for 2 months, waiting for the right moment to ask you to marry me. The words hit me like lightning. David. I was going to wait until after we dealt with my mother's attitude, until I was sure you felt secure in this family. But tonight showed me that we don't need anyone else's approval. We just need each other. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat as he dropped to one knee right there on his parents' front steps. Katherine Price, and yes, I know that would make your initials KPP, which is ridiculous, but I don't care. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me based on honesty and trust, and the kind of love that makes us both better? Tears sprang to my eyes as I looked down at him, this man who had just proven that he knew me better than I knew myself, who had chosen to fight for us instead of running away. Yes, I whispered, then louder. Yes, of course yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger, a perfect solitaire that caught the porch light and threw rainbows across the stone steps. Then he stood and kissed me again, deeper this time, full of promise and joy and the certainty of forever. When we broke apart, I realized that the front door had opened behind us. Margaret stood in the doorway, her face streaked with tears, her expression a mixture of joy and regret. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry for everything. And congratulations. Welcome to the family, Katherine. Really welcome this time." Behind her, I could see the dinner guests gathered in the foyer, their faces bright with curiosity and excitement. And in the back, near the staircase, I caught a glimpse of James, his face pale and defeated. Our eyes met across the crowded space, and I saw him nod once, a gesture of acceptance, maybe even respect. Then he turned and walked toward the back of the house, toward whatever exit would take him out of our lives for good. "Ready?" David asked, squeezing my hand. I looked at the ring sparkling on my finger, at the man beside me who had chosen love over doubt, at the family that was finally ready to accept me for who I really was. "Ready," I said. And together, we walked into our future.